So thank you for this presentation, and I would like also to thank the organizer, in particular Irene Reginato, who was very kind to me with the time and the order, and with my paper, with my abstract and so on. Je parlerai en anglais, mais par la discussion, on peut parler français. J'ai été trop optimiste en pensant qu'en 25 minutes, je pourrais montrer comment le Coran, en tant que symbole, objet matériel et expérience intellectuelle et spirituelle, représente un point d'observation pour les connexions et les conflits entre deux, en fait, trois mondes très distants mais profondément connectés. La philologie orientale du XVIIe siècle, les savoirs missionnaires et enfin ce genre littéraire particulier qui est les récits des conversions. Mais je vais tout de même essayer d'aborder certains des problèmes. I want to start with the words not of a Christian, but of a Muslim, a Qari, so a reciter of the Quran, and one of the greatest travelers ever, and Evelyn Celebi from Constantinople. Celebi visited Vienna on a diplomatic mission in 1665, and the city made a deep impression on him. He was particularly impressed by the cathedral, the Stephan's Dome, for many reasons. It was for the glittering gold and the colors, for the statues, for the paintings depicting heaven and hell, for the smell. But above all, he was impressed by the library, and I quote, "The walls of the cupboards have niches plastered with raw ambergris and housing copies of the Gospel, the Torah, the Psalms, and the Qur'an. Important books by various authors in every language of the world are found here. There are hundreds of thousands of bound books with special priests appointed for their care. It's a great library that has to be seen." Sadly, we can rule out the possibility that copies of the Quran and of the Torah were displayed alongside the Gospel in the Cathedral of Vienna. But perhaps Celebi was talking about the Imperial Library of Vienna. If so, he might have seen what he described. Because the collection of the Imperial Library, the collection of Oriental books, was indeed remarkable, and this was largely due to the contribution of the librarian and scholar Sebastian Tegnagel. There was librarian from the 1608 to 1636. Nowadays, Tegnagel is a ghostly figure, but in his day, he was quite a celebrity of the Republic of Letters. Casabon, Erpenius, De la Valle, Schickard, Olstenius, and Peresque considered him one of the greatest Orientalists of the time and the leading expert on Turkish. Here you can see that there is the one and actually the only portrait we have of him, which is on the facade of the Stephan's Dome that was so admired by Celebi. And below the portrait, an epigraph celebrates his skills as advisor of the emperors and as a polyglot. Now we know more about Sebastian Tegnagel thanks to a Vienna-based project already mentioned, in which I'm involved with my friends and colleagues Thomas Walnig, Julia Celik, Paola Molino, and Claudio Römer. In particular, I have been working on Tegnagel's Marginalia, on his manuscripts, and on his correspondence, over 1,000 letters, mostly in Latin, but also in Italian, German, Hebrew, French, Spanish. And yeah, this is just an example of the letters. Austrian historiography has portrayed Tegnagel as a counter-Reformation librarian and at best a Catholic Orientalist with little interest in religions other than Christianity. But a closer examination of his letter, of his marginalia, and of his notebooks reveals a much more diverse figure. Yes, it's true that Tegnagel was the advisor of the super Catholic Ferdinand II, and he published with the Jesuits of Ingolstadt, and who were at the forefront of the Counter-Reformation in Austria. But he was also a friend of the Rabbi Mahor Katan in Vienna, who considered him a friend of Israel. This is a quotation. Tegnagel sought permission to take a Muslim prisoner of war into his own home. He lent books on magic to an Orthodox prince and asked a friend to send him a Morisco to work as a scribe. He helped young Ruther, the great philologist, to keep his Protestant faith after the loss of the Palatine Library. And in a friend's album Amicorum, he wrote a text called the Aristotelian Prayer, which is a praise of abstract and philosophical God. So this list could go on, but I wanted just to show you how many things are behind the label of Catholic Orientalist. I'll start with Tegnagel's Qur'ans, not only because it's an interest case study, but also because it provides a platform to delve into broader issues behind just his individual story. The whole European Qur'an project made it clear that creating a new knowledge and new representations of the Qur'an in Europe was a difficult, complicated, even dangerous process in which non-European and non-Christian people played an essential role. And missionary propaganda, philological methods, religious controversy, clashes between power and faith, military conflicts, all these elements make up the ground from which the first Orientalism and a new knowledge of the Quran was born. And if there is one place in the 17th century Europe where this intricate texture is clearly visible, is Vienna, the Porta Orientis. By the way, just because we are few of them between us, talking about Vienna makes it easier also to remember that we are not dealing with neutral issues. The two sieges of Vienna are among the most symbolic and manipulated episodes in history and are now part of the mythology of the global right. You may probably recall that the terrorist who attacked the Christchurch mosque covered his weapons with writings. And one of the wars was Vienna 1683. But we also find reference to Vienna 1683, for instance, in Giorgia Meloni autobiography. But that's completely off topic. So let's back to Tegnagel and why he provided an interesting perspective. First, his life was shaped by two conflicts crucial to Oriental studies in Europe: the Turkish Wars and the 30 Years' War. Then Tegnagel was not from Vienna, but he was a Dutchman. And so he was a kind of bridge between the Northern European and Protestant Orientalism and Roman Catholic Orientalism. So this double nature is clearly visible in his friendship with the two brothers, Golius brothers, Petrus and Jacobus. One is the famous professor in Leiden, and the other is the friar, the Carmelite, who among his papers in Rome, by the way, had a draft translation of the Quran that I'm trying to learn more about. Sebastian Tegnagel died in 1636. In the same year, Athanasius Kircher wrote from Rome to Perez, telling him that it was absolutely impossible to study Arabic texts in Rome because of censorship, and that it was impossible, I quote, even to hold the Quran. Tegnagel also complained about the growing censorship of Oriental studies in Rome, but on his death, he donated his personal collection of Hebrew, Turkish, Persian, and Arabic manuscripts to the Imperial Library. And this included at least 14 Qur'ans, partial or complete. And in fact, in a letter to Pietro della Valle, he wrote that the most precious gem of his collection was this magnificent Qur'an made in an Ottoman Qur'an made in Esztergom with an interlinear Turkish translation. According to Meniski, the interlinear translation was made by Tegnagel's scribe, the Muslim Ibrahim Darwish. Although this attribution is no longer accepted, thanks to Julia Celik findings, it is worth mentioning a passage from the letter that Ibrahim wrote to Sebastian. Ibrahim Darwish was an excellent painter and a poet in Tegnagel's judgment, and he was taken prisoner during the Turkish wars in Hungary. And from Győr, that is a place in Hungary, not very far from Vienna, where he lived in slavery, he started working for Tegnagel. And in 1610, he sent a letter to him, and I used Claudia Römer's translation. Ibrahim begs Tegnagel to rescue him for his life of perpetual pain, and I quote, "For the love of your God, do not leave me in this state. Help me." Then he said that he could move during the day, but at night he was locked up underground and slept on the floor. And he gives Tegnagel a utilitarian reason to help him, because only in a more dignified working conditions can he work on books that Tegnagel so desire. So he adds a note about the book he was working on for Tegnagel, telling that it was a different, I quote, from all other books and teaches another kind of knowledge. Is he talking about Qur'an? Julia Celik found in Tegnagel's notebooks Quranic quotation handwritten by Ibrahim. But we will never know whether the two discussed the Qur'an, as, for instance, Etienne Hubert and Diego Bejerano have done about sodomy, no? In this brilliant passage of the supporter of religion against the infidels, published in English translation by Gerard Wiegers. So Tegnagel was never officially involved in Quranic studies. He did not complete any of his editorial projects due to the lack of funding, the war, personal character, and illness, and also lack of support by Erpenius. But his energies were focused on historical and geographical texts, not religious one. However, he was no doubt very familiar with the Qur'an. He even seemed to agree with Petros Kirstenius. Petros Kirstenius was another Orientalist based in Breslau, and wanted to print the Qur'an in Arabic in the Holy Roman Empire. And to this end, from Breslau, Kirstenius asked Sebastian Tegnagel to borrow 3 copies of the Qur'an. I wanted just to show this because there is here, because there is this interesting movement of manuscripts between Vienna and Breslau, and among other things, Tegnagel sent Pedro de Alcalá lexicon, on which he himself worked. And moreover, Tegnagel was aware, for instance, and tried to know more about the translation of the Quran done in Rome by the Jesuit Ignazio Lomellini. And when Kepler from Linz asked him about one of his manuscripts in Arabic simply by drawing, he didn't know Arabic, so by drawing a few words, Tegnagel replied that they looked like chapters from the Quran. Tegnagel himself made the copy, the first part of Wittmannstätter Epitome Totius al-Qurani. It was a copy taken from a miscellanea of Johanne Fabri, and this miscellanea is particularly interesting because it closes with an appendix that emphasizes the convergence between the beliefs and the rights of Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And Guido Bartolucci is working on this and on Ficino as a possible source. In similar vein, Tegnagel always underlined the passages in his manuscripts where he found overlaps between Islamic, Christian and Jewish texts and rituals, with the exception of the Quran, because he never has marginal notes except to indicate the surah. So he almost seems to reassure himself when, for instance, on the title page of this rare and wonderful booklet of prayers in Turkish and Arabic that contains many mentions to Christ and Mary, he has a quotation from Quintiliano, Dum clavum rectum teneam. So for Tegnagel, the Quran was a book for the study of language and for a tentative comparison between the three Abrahamic religions. The study of the Quran often went in hand to the study of the Talmud, and this connection between the two texts was perceived, analyzed, and articulated by Orientalists, theologians, and missionaries. So let's now see how Tegnagel's collection of books, so the collection of a single Orientalist officially not interested in religious studies, allows to observe other approaches and uses of the Quran. And I will show you two of them. Yeah, this one. The first is the Quran, the Oriental book, as a war trophy and not recognized as sacred text. And the second is a means of spiritual and transformation and conversion to Islam. So this is a Quran in 2 volumes, today at the National Library in Vienna. And so on the final page of one of the volume on the left, there is a Latin inscription that tells us that the book was part of the spoils from the siege of Esztergom in Hungary in 1595. So it was taken by an Austrian Protestant baron, Job Hartmann von Enenkel. On volume 2, again at the end, because this writer too did not know the direction of the Arabic script, we find a German inscription of a soldier, Paul, who took the manuscript and cursed its possible thief. Finally, on the right, on the right of the slide, we find the man who eventually acquired both volumes and was probably the first to realize that it was a Quran. And it is our Sebastian Tegnagel. So the paratexts of this Quran delineated 3 places: the battlefield, 2 private libraries, one of a Protestant and one of a Catholic man, and show, so to speak, 3 different approaches to the Arabic books, to Oriental books. For the educated nobleman, in Enkel, the book as a status symbol, a venerable yet unintelligible item to be preserved. For the soldier, the book as a war trophy and as an item, as an object for sale. And finally, for Tegnagel, the book as a tool of study and collection. By the way, this is not always the case, because, for instance, for example, the Catholic pirates, the Knights of Malta, almost always threw into the sea the Qur'ans and other books they found on Muslims captured on ships. So now let's look at a completely different meaning of the Quran that can be found in the same Tegnagel's collection. This is a peculiar manuscript. It's a polemical and cathetical work written by Bolashk, some lie. He was a young Hungarian who was captured during the Battle of Mohacs and converted to Islam, taking the typical patronymic for converts, so Murad ibn Abdullah. And after 30 years of captivity in Transylvania, he worked as a dragoman in Istanbul. And in 56, he wrote this book in Ottoman Turkish, and 10 years later, he himself added the Latin translation. And there are 2 copies of this manuscript, one in London and this one in Vienna. And this one is part of Tegnagel's collection. the Quran is at the core of Murad's discourse, all revolving around its interpretation as, I quote, a treasure chest of all truths, even the evangelical ones, a gift that allows reasons to access the whole truth. Insisting on the rationality of the Quran, of the conversion to Islam, belongs to the topic of the early modern times, but Murad combines this topic with a series of interesting metaphors. For instance, the Quran is also a medicina spiritualis, like a physician, by taking the pulse, can understand their patient state of health. In the same way, the words and the rhymes of the Quran made it possible to embrace with rational clarity the spiritual state of humankind. In terms of style, the Quran is described as extremely elegant and sophisticated, and Murad criticized the Latin translation, which he finds poor and biased. The central part of the book is a kind of humanistic treatise on virtues. He sees the Muslim model of life shaped, guided by the Quran, as a perfect example of embodiment of the classical virtues. And Martin Muslov, Paul Axe, and Chana Kristic have studied the circulation of this text, especially in anti-Trinitarian circles, and the role it played, for instance, in Adam Neusser's conversion to Islam. But the content of the book is very interesting. But the text in itself, the context and the readers are rather complex. Here is just enough to mention this further significance of the Quran in this, just exploring a single collection. So Murad Books is part of this rather large number of texts that present conversion to Islam as process based entirely on reading the Quran. And in early modern missionary literature, apostasy is often attributed to material reasons. But there is also the idea that the text of the Quran has a power of attraction, like honey, as Jacob explained. And so at the end of the 17th century, just to make an example, among others, there are reports from Isfahan of two Augustinian monks who had converted to Islam and become doctors d'Alcoran with the intention of writing a book against Christianity. But what is the image of the Quran? This is the very last part. The image of the Quran that emerges from the stories of conversion from Islam to Catholicism in early modern period. First of all, it's important to distinguish between missionary accounts of religious disputes and conversion stories. In fact, disputes only very rarely ended up in conversion. And in the stories, to generalize, the conversion of the doctors of the Qur'ans is considered a sort of hyper-conversion, an exceptional case that deserves to be told. So even in these cases, conversions come not through intellectual persuasion, but through miracles, images, or physical and nervous exhaustion. I would like just to give you 3 examples, but maybe we don't have time. Okay, so very quick. Sorry, this is just a representation of the quite rare of the use of the Quran in the ritual of the conversion to Islam. And it's very different from other written account that we have. But we don't have the time to delve into this. So the first example took place in Naples in 1610 and concerns a Turkish man of 60 years who was assai erudito nell'Alcorano. Despite numerous attempts, he never wanted to convert, and he accused the Jesuits of, I think that I can use Italian, ingannare I poveri schiavi. He fell ill and was hospitalized. And so the attempts, the hospital are a place for conversion. And the attempts to convert him so intensified And a friar who knew the Turkish tried to convince him that if he died as a Muslim, he would go to hell. But the sick slave si otturava le orecchie, and in the agony, he repeated in Turkish, "I don't want to do. Non mi voglio fare cristiano." So he didn't want to become a Christian. Until the friar decided to use a dreadful but very common means. He burning the hand of the man several times with the candles, and telling him that much worse pain awaited him in hell. At this point, according to the chronicle, the man embraced the crucifix and asked to be baptized. The second case is very similar and concerns a woman, a young woman, Kata. She was educated and studied the Qur'an and systematically refused to convert, adding that she regretted not having her books with her to answer more convincingly to the Jesuits. She felt ill, tried to resist as long as she could, and then finally she gave in. Finally, the case of Malta concerns one of the members of the famous slave conspiracy of 1749, when a group of Muslim slaves attempt to kill the Grand Master of the Order of Malta. The plot was discovered and the participants were horribly killed. And these two pictures are part of a cycle of drawings depicting the tortures inflicted to the rebels. Now, one of them, Ibrahim, is presented in many texts that recount the events as an extremely learned man. He knew not only the Qur'an, all the Qur'an, but also Plato and Chrysostom, and engaged in a high-level intellectual dispute with the friars who tried to convert him. It is said he asked for his books, and actually he described that he was with his books, but we don't know, of course, if they were and whether they included the Qur'an. So there is not enough time to read the passage in full, but the friars and the Jesuits draw on a series in this dispute, a series of clichés, a repertoire that have remained virtually unchanged for centuries, to respond to Ibrahim's objections against the Christianity and to ridicule the Quran. So to do so, it was not necessary to know the Quran, we know that, or to have read it, because it was precisely the commonplaces that were in circulation and periodically fixed in what we call conversion manuals. And I would like to conclude by showing one of these manuals, written quite late by the director of the Collegio dei Neofiti in Rome, one of the many institutions set up in Rome to convert Jews and Muslims. All section of this book, as you can see, is devoted to the strategy to use with Muslims, and the first thing to do, it says, is to trigger a kind of alienation from the Quran. Then follows a series of points who came across into this workshop, including that one about the poetic nature of the Quran. Is in the middle. Rovira was relatively well informed, actually, and knew and quoted Marracci translation. And I will end by showing you an image contained in this terrible text. It's a terrible text. There are two allegorical representations of della Casa dei Catecumeni. And the neophytes must leave their books and to go up to the floor, to the top floor, and then to heaven, while their books burn in the flames of hell. So we began with the delightful image of Celebi telling of having seen the Torah and the Gospels and the Quran displayed together into the Cathedral of Vienna. And we end with this image of the Talmud and the Quran in the flames.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.